Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, I had a voice radio. So today, we are continuing our look at all the decks that have won the Pokemon Trading Card Game World Championship. We are looking at the Darkrai Mewtwo deck, with which Igor Costa took home the crown in 2012. And I got a bit nostalgic watching the World Championships this year. I was there in 2012, so I thought, you know what? I want to do the 2012, and I can, because, I get to choose what videos to do, go me, etc. There were two main Pokemon in this deck, the first of which was Darkrai. Now, Darkrai actually had a really good ability, whereby if any of your Pokemon had a Darkness energy attached to them, and this deck also played Prism energy, which counted as Dark energy, more on that in a moment, they had no retreat cost. Really handy to allow you to move your Pokemon around, retreat if you're about to be KO'd. But really here, it was all about the attack Night Spear. 2 dark, 1 colourless energy, 90 damage. And 30 to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. Now, as we're going to see with Darkrai, as we're going to see with Mewtwo, at this particular stage in the Pokemon trading card game, 180 HP was about the most you had. Darkrai had 180, Mewtwo had 170, Tornadus had 180. You didn't really see Pokemon with more than 180. Which means you were basically 2-hit KOing with the main damage, or KOing with 3 of the residual damage and 1 of the regular. Or you would take out support Pokemon on the bench using the regular attack. Celebi was popular at the time, ladies and gentlemen, and 2 Night Spears, it went bye-bye. The other main attacker here was Mewtwo EX. Mewtwo could use Psy Drive, and technically in this deck, you were playing enough Prism Energy to use it, but you didn't use Psy Drive. It was all about X-Ball. 20 damage times the amount of energy attached to both active Pokemon. This was a huge attack. Mewtwo was, back in the day, completely and utterly overpowered. The one saving grace was that Mewtwo was weak to Mewtwo. So essentially, just everyone was playing a whole bunch of Mewtwo in their deck and then just hitting each other for weakness, because if there were 4 energy total, a double colourless on each Mewtwo, you'd be hitting 160. Something like a plus power or an extra energy would then get the KO. Mewtwo was everywhere, and Mewtwo Wars were a huge part of this format, ladies and gentlemen. Absolutely phenomenally huge. The other attacker in this deck was Terrakion, and really, Terrakion was played as an anti-Darkrai card. Because you see, as much as Mewtwo was everywhere, Darkrai was everywhere. So some people would play Mewtwo with Tornadus and Celebi. Tornadus as an extra attacker, Celebi to get extra energy on the field. Some people would play Mewtwo with Terrakion, some people would play Mewtwo with Darkrai, and some people would play it with Darkrai and Terrakion. Whereas some people would play Darkrai on its own, some people would play it with Mewtwo, some people would play it with Terrakion, some people would play it with Mewtwo and Terrakion. To put it simply, Darkrai and Mewtwo were everywhere, so Mewtwo gave you an answer to Mewtwo and Terrakion gave you an answer to Darkrai. And again, you could use Land Crush here. 90 damage was enough to get a 1-hit KO on a Darkrai, but really here it was all about the attack Retaliate. If one of your Pokemon was knocked out by damage during your opponent's last turn, i.e. not poison, placing damage counters, etc., then you do 90 for 2 energy. So you save yourself an energy. And of course, that is enough to get a 1-hit KO on Darkrai. And here, you do big damage with either Darkrai or Mewtwo, using Mewtwo to counter opposing Mewtwo's and Terrakion to counter opposing Darkrai's. Now, there were 2 hugely important, very powerful support Pokemon on which we relied, one of which was Shaymin, but not the one you might expect. You see, before the ridiculously, utterly played in every deck broken Shaymin EX, there was the ridiculously powerful, utterly broken, played in every deck Shaymin from Unleashed, with the ridiculous ability Celebration Wind. And essentially, you can just move as many energy cards attached to your Pokemon as you like, to any of your other Pokemon. You could completely rearrange the energy on your field. It meant that in the early game, you really didn't have to be that careful about where you put energy. It means you could move energy from a Pokemon that was about to be KO'd to a Pokemon that wasn't, so your opponent could either take prizes or knock your energy off the field, but not both. It could power up a surprise attacker, so you could drop a Terrakion and a Shaman, and then all of a sudden you're using Land Crush to do 180 damage. It was, to put it frankly, a little bit dumb, but awesome. And Smeargle. This was a beautiful Smeargle. The ability here, or Poker Power as it was known back then, is really why it was played. Portrait. Essentially, if Smeargle's in the active, you look at your opponent's hand and copy a supporter card. Couple of things to mention. First of all, you had to copy a supporter card. So if all you found was a Juniper, same as Sycamore but earlier and with a different name, you had to discard your hand. And one of my games in Worlds this particular year, I basically lost a mirror match because I just kept Smeargling into Junipers, probably when I didn't have to, because I was overly excited about grinding into Worlds, which was probably a bit silly. I feel like I could have done better that year. Never mind. And if you switched around and got multiple Smeargles in and out the active, you could use multiple portraits. You could potentially be using 4 supporters in a turn with Smeargle. And I had games where I used 4 supporters in a turn. It really sped up your setup. Now, in terms of trainer cards, if you weren't playing back then, some of these might make you jealous. Professor Oak's new theory allowed you to just shuffle your hand into your deck and draw 6 cards. It was ridiculously consistent shuffle draw that we haven't seen since. N was played, we've all been playing N for a while now, but for newer players, you each shuffle your hand into your deck and draw cards equal to the number of prizes remaining. In the early game it gets you lots of cards, in the late game it gets your opponent few cards and slows them down. Professor Juniper is, well, it was, as Professor Sycamore is now. Discard your hand, draw 7 cards. It is the fastest, most aggressive draw we've got. Really useful for setting up. Wanna be jealous? How about Junk Arm? Now, I have mentioned this in a couple of videos, but essentially discard 2 cards from your hand and pull a trainer card. Back then, trainers were trainer items, so you couldn't get supporters. It was essentially items. But oh my goodness, if you see some of the items coming up in a minute, you'll understand why this is so good. You play 4 of these and you get 4 more items of your choice. Speaking of ridiculous items, Pokemon Catcher. But this was before there was an errata, so you didn't need to flip a coin. It was Lysander as an item card. It didn't use your supporter slot for the turn, and with Junk Arm you could use it 8 times in a game. Believe me when I say, ladies and gentlemen, back in this format, if you wanted to pull a Pokemon into the active, you could. There wasn't a, is he going to get Lysander for game? You just always had the Pokemon Catcher, which kind of in a way made it a bit fairer. Random Receiver we've still got nowadays. It basically just lets you reveal cards until you find a supporter. Back then, the only real supporters you played were Juniper, N, and Professor Oak's new theory, i.e. they were all draw supporters. So by playing Random Receiver, you guaranteed you got a draw supporter. People didn't play stuff like Lysander back then because they didn't have to, which meant you could just always be drawing cards with your supporter. Dark Patch, still legal and expanded. Oh my goodness, it is a great card. Think Aqua Patch for Dark Pokemon, which is weird to say because I've usually, well, especially when I was introducing it, I would call Aqua Patch Dark Patch for Water Pokemon. You attach a Dark Energy from your discard to one of your bench Dark Pokemon. Darkrai takes free energy to get going. You need acceleration. That's where Dark Patch comes in. And remember Junk Arm, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, a little bit silly. Eviolite just reduced damage done to you by 20. The theory here largely was Darkrai doesn't 2-hit KO other Darkrai if you've got an Eviolite, and Terrakion does not 1-hit KO if you've got an Eviolite. Which is why everybody played Plus Power. Plus Power meant you did an extra 10 damage. Darkrai's got an Eviolite, don't worry about that. you can play a plus power and then you get the one-hit KO anyway. Yay! Switch has literally been legal for the entirety of the Pokemon trading card game. You switch your active Pokemon. Yes, you can retreat with Darkrai, but Switch allows you to reuse Smeargle. Smeargle, switch into a Smeargle. Junkarm, switch into a Smeargle. Then you can play your supporter for the turn. Ultra Ball was then and is still now the best Pokemon search we've got, but don't sleep on Jewel Ball. I love Jewel Ball. Jewel Ball's amazing. Flip 2 coins. For each heads, grab a basic Pokemon out of your deck. Remember that we've got cards like Smeargle, so if you didn't have a supporter, you could find a Smeargle, and if you could get it in the active, you could portrait, and then you could draw some cards. It was a little bit silly. The kind of card, if this was reprinted tomorrow, it would instantly go in like every deck, because you could use it on Tapu Lele. But it's not been reprinted, so you can't. Super Scoop Up, however, has been reprinted. You can pick up a Pokemon, get a Pokemon out the active to reuse Smeargle, pick up Shaman to reuse it, or, to be perfectly honest, just pick up a heavily damaged Darkrai. Why not? Now, in terms of energy, obviously you played Darkness Energy for Darkrai, you played Fighting Energy for Terrakion. You played Double Colourless Energy largely for Mewtwo here, although it could be used on other Pokemon. And you played Prism Energy, which was basically Rainbow Energy, but you don't have to take a damage counter, but you can only use it on basic Pokemon. I'm assuming at this stage, between Jewel Ball and Prism Energy and everything else, and how powerful Darkrai and Mewtwo are, you're starting to see why nobody played Evolutions. Bit of a lie. Very few people played Evolutions. It was mostly basic decks back then. So, you could use Prism Energy. And it was nice, and it worked on Mewtwo, and it worked on Terrakion, and it worked on Darkrai. But back then, we had Lost Remover that was kind of like Enhanced Hammer, except the energy went in the Lost Zone, and you could never get it back. So, not terribly safe, shall we say. So, Prism Energy here, good, but you didn't want to rely on it too much for fear of it getting Lost Zoned. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the deck with which Igor Costa won the 2012 World Championships. The other big decks at the time, really, you had CMT, Celebi, Mewtwo, Tornadus, you had Darkrai, and then you kind of had Darkrai, Mewtwo. And they really were most of the big decks at the time. Some people were playing Zekrom Mewtwo decks with Pachirisu to put extra energy down and Shaman to move it over, but they were a little bit underpowered by the time 2012 came around. Some people were playing Mewtwo with Electric to accelerate energy onto it, but please believe me when I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that in 2012, it was basically Mewtwo. It was all Mewtwo. Like the other three Worlds decks printed in 2012, other than Igor Costa's Mewtwo Darkrai, there was Mewtwo Terrakion, Mewtwo Eels, and Celebi Mewtwo Tornadus. So, yeah, Mewtwo really was everywhere. Now, if you like these kind of videos, make sure you comment down below. Maybe request a year that you want to see. Make sure you click that like button, because if these videos are popular enough, I will do more of them. You can follow me on Twitter @TheWassy, but make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel. That would be lovely. You can follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio for some live action. And if you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts, etc., then go and check out my Patreon at patreon.com/PTCGRadio. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.